all, or at least as many as I can remember, of the books I didn't buy in England but wish I had. And this is what's so fascinating and magical about Blackwell's bookshop. Very tempting, but no. There were so many books that I wanted. Hello everyone, welcome to a new video. Welcome if you're new here. Hi, I'm Andrea. I'm a full-time university writing instructor and a part-time content creator and indie author. Welcome back if you're one of my lovely returning friends. It is great to have you all here today. It's going to be a bonus video today, and apologies in advance for any ambient noise you can hear out the window, but we are literally down to the last few days where I can have my windows open. So we're just gonna deal with the noise. For today's bonus video, this Friday, we're gonna do another book video. I do promise though, not all of the bonus videos are going to be book videos. I feel like that's what they've been so far, but this is kind of the last idea I had that's definitely a book video that I wanted to film. And then we'll kind of switch to, like, every now and then I'll do a what I've been reading lately video. But I have been wanting to film this video for a while. Mostly for my own records and just so that I have this recorded, but I have mentioned it a couple of times and some of you expressed interest in seeing this video, so we're doing it as a Friday bonus video this week. And this is going to be all, or at least as many as I can remember, of the books I didn't buy in England but wish I had. So yeah, this is all the books that I wish I could have bought while I was in England last spring, and I wish I could have brought them all home with me, but unfortunately there is a weight limit on your bags, and also my bank account has a limit of how many books I can buy in one go. And this is the difficulty with traveling for me, because books are one of my favorite souvenirs to buy. I love buying books in the places that I visit because then that book is always a reminder of that time. So they're one of my favorite souvenirs. I did still buy a lot of books when I was in England, and I will try to remember to link it, but I did do a like books and stationery haul when I got back from that trip. And then as I was going through and editing all the vlogs from the trip, which there's also a playlist, I'll try to link the playlist, there were a lot of books that I was just noticing in the clips that I was like, oh yeah, that book. And then also scrolling back through my camera roll on my phone, I have a tendency of taking pictures of books when I travel so that when I get home, I can look them up and add them to like my TBR list and my to buy wish list. And so that's how this idea to film this video came along. I figured, let me go and look through and make that list so that I can start buying some of these books, because even now, like, I can't buy all of them in one go, but it would be nice to start buying 1 or 2 or 3 of them each month and slowly reading them. So I've got my laptop. I have started organizing all of the footage that's going to like play over me talking every now and then. So we're gonna kind of go city by city and bookshop by bookshop. And some of these are going to include gift shops, so, and like the book section of gift shops. So if you are new and you missed the England trip last spring, my mom and I went to England for just over 2 weeks, and we stayed in London, York, and Oxford. And when we were in London, we took day trips out to Bath and to Greenwich. And when we were in Oxford, we took a day trip out to Blenheim Palace. And so, yeah, we're just gonna dive right in because otherwise this intro is going to be 1,000,000 hours long. So day 1 of London, we went to Daunt Books, and I'm not going to dwell too long on Daunt Books because number one, I probably would have bought every book there. Daunt Books is really cool in that it's broken up into different sections, and the room that's like the most Instagrammed like room of Daunt Books is divided up by countries, and then certain countries even by cities or regions. So the upper gallery of this room is all London, England in general, Scotland, Wales, Ireland, and then it divides up into like the different counties. And so there's a lot. So like almost every book in the London section I really wanted, because I am fascinated by London history. So I think I have one specific image of London, a guide for curious wanderers. It looked really cool. I think it would be really nice to have in my collection of like London photo books. This one is mostly illustrations, which I thought was really cool. It has lots of like little bits of London and little like elements, things that you wouldn't, not just places, but like plaques or statues or things that you would see along the way and you might just overlook, but they all have like this interesting history to them. So I was really tempted to get this one. I ended up getting a different book, which you can see in the what I did buy, the books and stationery haul video. Really enjoyed that. Then on day 2 or then on like day 3 or day 4, I can't remember when, we went to Liberty. And Liberty's of London is a department store, but they have a really nice like books and stationery section, which is fantastic for gifting, as you can find beautiful editions of classic novels. They had a couple different types of editions. One, the same publisher that did the copy of Persuasion that I got in Bath, but then they have, I think it's like a cloth bound edition from a different publisher. And so I think those just make great gifts. Even if someone has already read the book, just gifting someone a book in an edition of a book they already love would be really nice. So their book section are largely like books that would make good gifts. So classic novels, there were lots of puzzle books. I really liked the Bletchley Park brain teasers. We got a copy of it for my mom. My dad and I got a copy of it for my mom for Christmas, but I would still like to get a copy for myself. The day we went out to Greenwich, there was an antique or like vintage bookseller in Greenwich Market. I would have happily bought the entire table, just because I have a dream of like having like a whole bookcase full of shelves full of antique books. I love antique books. Even if I don't read them, just the history in them, I'm just fascinated by. So there were some really lovely books. I was really tempted to get at least one, but I didn't find any that were like, I have to have this title as an antique book. I wish I could have bought all of them. I really do. And they weren't badly priced. Most of them were only like £5 or £6. So yeah, there were a lot of books at the Greenwich Market bookseller, but then the bookshop, gift shop at the Royal Observatory was really good. I was never a science person in school. I never felt like I did well in math or science, but I am very curious about science and I love science in general. So when I can find books that help me learn more about science, like disciplines and fields of science, I am all about that. So there were a bunch of books that I was really curious about, some on black holes. I really want to start reading some of Stephen Hawking's work. Was really tempted by some of the Stephen Hawking books. And then I really liked this Magnificent Maps puzzle books. I like puzzles and I like maps. Really like maps. So I thought that one was really cool. And then I really wanted, and this is one I'm definitely adding to my list, Time, 10 Things You Should Know, A Journey into the Greatest Mystery of Our Universe. This one looked really interesting, and this is one I would like to try to get sooner rather than later and give it a read sooner rather than later. And then on our last day in London, we went to the Transport Museum, the London Transport Museum. I also have an odd fascination with transportation in general, like planes and trains and boats and all of these things, but specifically trains, and also like specifically the London Underground. I am fascinated by the London Underground, and they had this really cool book called Seats of London, A Field Guide to London Transport Maquette Patterns. And so it's all about the different fabrics or the maquettes that they make the seats out of, all the upholstery fabric. Again, this is super niche, super niche, but I am fascinated. So I'd really like to get that book because I would like to read more about the different fabrics that they use. So that was kind of it for the books in London. Then we went up to York. York had a lot to tempt me with book-wise. There are so many adorable bookshops in York. I mean, there's a ton of bookshops in London. There really are. So it's not surprising that I found so many books in London. But York, for being much more compact than London, there's still a lot of bookshops. So one of the bookshops that Tamsin took me in was called The Works, and they do more than just books, but they had really, really good prices on fiction, on novels, paperback novels. And they had a lot that were like 3 for £6, and I was so tempted. But I did manage to resist because I knew that I would just be filling my suitcase with novels. And most of these I knew I could find back in the US. But I was really curious about this one, A Lesson in Malice by Catherine Kerwin. That one looked really, really interesting. She said yes to a dinner invitation, and now she's a murder suspect. I mean, come on, that just sounds really good. So I need to see if I can find this here in the US. Sometimes the difficulty I have, and I do have to try to check this when I'm over there, is making sure I'm not passing up on a book that isn't currently available in the US. Sometimes when they publish a book in the UK, they publish it in the US either at the same time or only a month later. Sometimes it's 6 months to a year before the US edition finally launches over here. Another thing I look for is, does it have a UK cover that I like better than the US cover? So that's another factor that might make me get the book there as opposed to waiting and getting it back here. But most of what I saw at The Works were books that I knew I could get here for a similar price, maybe a little bit more, or possibly even get it through the library. But then we went to what is probably one of my favorite bookshops ever, and that is the Minster Gate Bookshop. It's right around the corner, like right next to the York Minster Cathedral, and it's an antique and used bookshop. I think it was mostly used. There might have been some new, but the prices were really, really good. Right outside, it was so tempting. I really wanted the Book of English Magic. I was so tempted because, again, the price was really, really good, and I know it's cheap. It would have been cheaper to buy it over there, but if I had bought every book over there that was cheaper over there, I would have spent a fortune in excess baggage fees, so it wouldn't actually have worked out to be cheaper. I also really wanted the little book of Ikigai. Ikigai is a concept, a Japanese concept that I've been fascinated by, and I've been wanting to read some books on the concept of Ikigai, so I was really tempted by that one as well. And then once we went inside, there was just a million more things to tempt me. This bookshop has just about everything you could think of and everything you could want. I could have literally spent all day in this bookshop. I could have spent all morning scouring the books, popped out for some coffee and a sandwich, and then gone back and spent the afternoon continuing to just go shelf by shelf, bookcase by bookcase, looking at every single book. I truly could have spent all day there. So I had been on the hunt there for a really beautiful edition of Jane Eyre. I was looking for a beautiful edition of Jane Eyre at all the bookshops we went to in York, and I didn't really find one, so I was fine with that. But Jane Eyre is set in the Yorkshire moors, and so I thought to buy a copy of Jane Eyre in York would have been really nice, but alas, I couldn't find one that I really liked. But I was also tempted by this book, The Complete Language of Flowers, A Definitive and Illustrated History. I love the idea of flowers having their own language attached to them, and that giving certain flowers or putting together a selection of flowers into a bouquet can like pass along a message, or can convey a message. I just think that concept is really, really cool. So yeah, overall, the Minster Gate, really, really cool. Loved that bookshop. Would have bought just about everything there, but there were a few, like I said, that History of Magic and the little book of Ikigai were definitely two that I wanted to add to my list. There were other places in York that I looked at books. I know I looked at some books in the Minster the York Minster gift shop and in the National Railway Museum, but again, managed to show some restraint. So after York, we then went down to Oxford, and Oxford had a lot to offer. Out at Blenheim Palace, we had a fantastic day walking around Blenheim Palace. We had so much fun, and I definitely want to go back. I really want to go back, especially to explore the gardens a bit more. But their gift shop is one of the best gift shops I have been in. Of all the like museums and historic properties and palaces, the royal palaces that I've been to in London and around London, you know, Kensington Palace, Buckingham Palace, the Tower of London, Hampton Court. Blenheim Palace truly has one of the best and most like wide-ranging gift shops, including a really good selection of books. So I was really curious about A Passion for Fashion, 300 Years of Style at Blenheim Palace. That one just sounded really interesting to me. I don't still do fashion research, but as a scholar, but I am still very interested in the topic. So I still like reading about it and learning about it personally, even though I no longer write and publish on that topic or in that field. So that one was really interesting to me. And then because of the Churchill connection, so Winston Churchill was born at Blenheim Palace and had a long history with Blenheim Palace. They had a lot of books related to Winston Churchill, his life, his family. So there was this book, First Lady, The Life and Wars of Clementine Churchill. I'm really, really interested in the women behind or in the shadow of the big men of history, because often their contributions are just as important, but in different ways and ways that are easier to overlook. And I like women's history in general, but I'm fascinated by women like Clementine Churchill, like the wives of prime ministers, the wives of presidents. So like my PhD dissertation was partially about American first ladies, you know, the women who are associated with these men who have such great power, but they themselves are either powerless or are in this kind of silent role where their power has to be wielded in silent and more subtle ways. I'm really curious to learn more about Clementine, because I know quite a bit about Winston Churchill and his influence in British history and, you know, his influence on World War II and all of that, but I really know nothing about her. And so I was fascinated by that one and was really tempted about that one. I also was really tempted by The Churchill Girls, which is the story of Winston's daughters. So again, the daughters of these big men of power. What must it have been like growing up as the daughter of Winston Churchill? You know, as the wife of Winston Churchill, you would make that decision. Like, she kind of knew that he was probably going to be working towards being prime minister and being, you know, in this position of power. So like Clementine marrying Winston Churchill would have had some expectation or knowledge of what their life might be like. But when you're born into that kind of family and you don't get to choose that, that is your life. I'm just fascinated about them. So when I saw that there was a whole book just on his daughters, I was really curious about that one. So that was our first full day in Oxford. It was a beautiful day. It was sunny. It was warm. It was just perfect weather. The next day it was rainy, cloudy and rainy. And so we spent it in a bookshop, because what better thing to do on a cloudy, rainy day? So we went to Blackwell's. A trip to Oxford is not complete without stopping in at Blackwell's bookshop. If you are a book lover, if you love reading, if you love just being around books, if you love bookshops, you have to go to Blackwell's. It is such an institution in the area, and it's one of my top favorite bookshops in all of England that I've been to. Like, that's been the favorite. Minster Gate Bookshop is giving Blackwell's a run for its money. I still think Blackwell's is possibly my absolute favorite. So yeah, I love Blackwell's. I have a lot of fond memories of being in Blackwell's in the summer of 2014 and the summer of 2015, when I spent several weeks to 3 months in Oxford during each of those summers. Blackwell's was one of my favorite places to go. I would browse the books, I would go upstairs to the coffee shop and get myself a drink and sit and write. I wrote a good chunk of my first romance novel in the coffee shop there at Blackwell's, so I am biased, but I do love Blackwell's. And they do not disappoint. So there were a ton of books. I think the majority of my pictures of books came from Blackwell's. So I really was curious about how to be a Renaissance woman, the untold history of beauty and female creativity. This one looked really, really fascinating. Again, I like women's history. I like the untold stories of women's history. So this just had all of that. Then The Hands of Time, A Watchmaker's History of Time. This one sounded really, really interesting. Talking about both the history of watchmaking and how that relates to the history of time in general, like history and time in general, but then also the history of the craftsmanship of watchmaking. This just sounded like it had a lot that I really, really am drawn to, but also it's a woman master watchmaker who is the author, and so again, a woman in a field that seems like it would be fairly male dominated was another reason why this one was added to my list. Then, and this is one I'm probably going to buy this month. If I haven't bought it already by the time you're watching this, I will probably be buying it soon. And that is The Missing Thread, A New History of the Ancient World Through the Women Who Shaped It by Daisy Dunn. I almost bought this in Blackwell's. It truly was the one that I almost came away with, but it was hardcover, it was really big. I knew I'd be able to find it in the US, and I have seen it at Changing Hands Bookshop here in Phoenix or in Tempe, so I knew I could get this over here. The size, the weight, I knew I couldn't justify buying it at Blackwell's. But this one is something I'm totally interested in. It covers all the bases. It's history, it's women's history, it's untold stories of women's history, and it's doing that recovery work to bring back the stories and the history of women who have kind of been overlooked throughout history. So that one is like top of my list. Then there were some books related to the Tudor period. So Thorns, Lust and Glory, The Betrayal of Anne Boleyn. I am fascinated by Anne Boleyn, and not just because of the typical story that we've seen. Like, I've watched The Tudors on HBO, and I've seen the other Boleyn girl, and I feel like she is a case that is just so fascinating and so rich for dramatic interpretation, but I'm really interested in the like history behind that, and the way that she often gets put up as this like scapegoat, or like all the blame gets put on her for everything that was happening in that time of British history, as if Henry VIII had no responsibility at all. Anyway, so that one I was really curious about. And then next to it on the shelf was The Waiting Game, The Untold Story of the Women Who Served the Tudor Queens. Again, like untold story, women's history, women who are often seen but not heard. So the ladies in waiting to the queens. Ladies in waiting would have been seen around court, but they wouldn't have had that much power and agency on their own. Ultimately, they're serving the queen, who ultimately is serving the king. And so there would have been a certain amount of political maneuvering and power and intrigue, but ultimately that power is on a very, very, very short leash for the ladies in waiting, and their fates were often very closely tied to the women they served. This book just sounded really good, and now that I'm seeing this clip again, I'm like, oh, that needs to go top of the list as well. And then this one was fascinating. Ghosts of the British Museum, A True Story of Colonial Loot and Restless Objects. I've been to the British Museum, and I'm fascinated by the artifacts they have there, but then there is this very problematic history about how these artifacts were acquired, and that I feel kind of puts not the reputation that I'm thinking of, that's not the word I'm thinking of, but it puts the validity, maybe is the word, the validity of the institution into question. I think this is a conversation that we need to be having, particularly in the art world. So this book just sounded really, really fascinating, and like one that I would definitely want to read. Then I headed downstairs, and it was funny because I was looking through this clip, and on my way downstairs, I see a copy of Doppelganger by Naomi Klein, which is the book that I happen to be reading. So I saw it in that poster and thought, oh, that sounds really good. And I'm familiar with Naomi Klein as an author, and so I kind of made a mental note to look up that book when I got home, and then I was able to get a copy of it at work. So currently reading it, really enjoying it so far. Downstairs in the Norrington room, and this is what's so fascinating and magical about Blackwell's bookshop. Upstairs, when you first walk in, it looks like a regular bookshop. But you go downstairs and it's like you've stepped into a whole other world, and Blackwell's is truly a TARDIS in bookshop form. It is much bigger on the inside than you think it's going to be. The first time I went downstairs, a few years, like it was several years ago, like I'd been to Blackwell's a number of times before finally going downstairs, and it was like amazing. So downstairs there was lots more to tempt me. I was really interested in The Situation Room by George Stephanopoulos. American author, American book, knew I could find this here. But The Situation Room, the inside story of presidents in crisis, sounds really, really interesting. Then they've got lots of these little object lessons books, and the one on glitter just sounded really interesting. White holes inside the horizon. I'm fascinated by black holes, the concept of white holes, astrophysics, astronomy in general, just fascinated by all of that. So this one looked really interesting. Nice little book. Reading lessons. The books we read at school, the conversations they spark, and why they matter sounded really, really interesting. And now that I'm looking at talking about all of this again, I think this needs to get added to my list, like sooner rather than later as well. With everything happening at the moment, with talks about book bans and controlling what we read and limiting what we read, limiting access to how early we can read certain books. Like, I think this is really important. Like, there is value in all of these books, even if you disagree with them, even if you don't like them. Reading them within certain contexts is really, really important. So I'd be really curious about like what this book in particular is talking about. I also was curious in the book you need to read to write the book you want to write. Generally, I don't read a whole lot of writing craft books, but I am curious about them, and this one sounded really interesting. Like, what is it about it that it's the book that you need to read before you write the book you want to write? So that one looked interesting. On the topic of novels that I want to read that I've seen film adaptations of, Possession by A.S. Byatt. I've seen the film version of it. I really enjoy the story, so I would be really curious to read the original book. Often that is like my gateway into certain books. I watch the movie first and then I read the book. I was really curious. When I saw this, it reminded me I need to get this. The Book of Dust, Volume 2, The Secret Commonwealth. I have read the original Historic Materials trilogy by Philip Pullman, and I've read The Belle Sauvage, which is book 1 of this second like trilogy he's doing. I think it's a second trilogy. So volume 1, I've read that, but I still haven't read volume 2, and I would really like to read that. Shakespeare's Sisters. I saw this on the way downstairs. 4 women who wrote the Renaissance. Again, it's the whole idea of women whose stories we don't know as well. We know so much about Shakespeare and his contemporaries, about Christopher Marlowe, Kidd, Johnson. I'm forgetting all the rest. I did take a class on Renaissance drama on everyone but William Shakespeare, and I've taken a course on Shakespeare. So I know a lot about the men who were writing at the time, but the idea of 4 women writers in the Renaissance just sounds really, really fascinating to me. Also downstairs in the Norrington room, they have the very short introductions series. I'm slowly planning on collecting a bunch of these. I did buy one, but there were several that I didn't buy. These books they're little, and they're relatively short, relatively easy reads. They're meant to be, like they say, a very short introduction to the topic. So I have one on biographies from when I took a class on biographies, and I have the one for rhetoric. But I know that they do one for witchcraft and the history of witchcraft, which I thought would be really interesting to read. Astrophysics is another one that I think I would like. Like, you name the subject, you name the like field of study, they probably have one of these very short introductions. I'd love to just collect a few more. They had some really beautiful coffee table books, including the complete costume history. Do I need another fashion history book? Absolutely not. Will that stop me from growing my collection? Absolutely not. But this would have been huge and incredibly heavy. So this is exactly the sort of book that I do not buy when I'm traveling. This is something I take a picture of and I order it online when I get home. The nice thing is Blackwell's ships internationally. So I knew that anything I saw over there that I didn't buy, if I couldn't find it from a US retailer, I knew I'd be able to order it through Blackwell's and have it shipped. They had a bunch of really beautiful like coffee table books. They had some on knitting and embroidery that looked really interesting. And then upstairs in Blackwell's, I'm adding this to the list, not because it was ever a serious contender, but they had a first edition, Northanger Abbey and Persuasion, and each book, Northanger Abbey and Persuasion, were in 2 volumes each. And so the 4 volumes total for the 2 books, 11,000 British pounds. Very tempting. But no. And they also had a beautiful edition of Pride and Prejudice and a beautiful edition of Sense and Sensibility. Would have loved to have bought those. Wish my book budget extended to buying really expensive first editions. Alas, it did not, so I had to pass and leave them behind, but they were very tempting. The Garden Against Time in Search of a Common Paradise looked and sounded really, really interesting. The cover was gorgeous, so that was one I wanted to look up when I got home. Also, Precious, The History and Mystery of Gems Across Time. So this one looked really, really interesting. I love jewelry, I love gemstones, I love rocks and minerals. My grandfather got me really into rocks and minerals and collecting them. So learning the history of gems and stones across time just sounded really, really interesting. The Bookmakers, A History of the Book in 18 Remarkable Lives. This one sounded really, really interesting. I would love to look a little bit closer. I don't remember if I looked inside to see like what the 18 stories and lives are that the author looks at. I'm fascinated by books and I'm fascinated by the history of books, so I think this book would be really, really interesting to read. And then Why Women Grow. This one looked really interesting. I'd heard someone talking about this book before, so I'd already heard a little bit about it. So this one sounded like one that I would want to read. I think it's largely about gardening, but again, like that's just an aspect of women's lives that I find fascinating and would like to learn more about. And then the last book, and the last like place that we went where I saw books was the Ashmolean Museum. They had a lot of books there, a lot of art history type books, a lot of coffee table art books. But I'm always curious about poetry collections, and so this book, A Poem to Read Aloud Every Day of the Year, I like the idea of reading a different poem every day, so edited collections and anthologies like this are really appealing to me because I don't really know where to start with poetry, and I don't know a lot of poets who I would want to buy an entire book of their work, but anthologies and collections like this allow me to find different poets and experience different poems by different poets and see which ones I'm kind of drawn to, and then find poets that I might want to look up more of their work. So yes, that is a long but still probably not exhaustive list of all the books I wish I bought in England. I'm sure there are some pictures I overlooked and didn't get to add in, but there were so many books. There were so many books that I wanted. I always lose my mind just a little bit when I go to England in terms of shopping in general, but bookstores are a particular brand of kryptonite for me. It will bring me to my knees. I have very little self-control. I think the fact that my mom was there for most of the bookshop visits to like remind me that you do have a baggage allowance and we cannot buy a whole suitcase just to fill with books, because left to my own devices, I probably would have done that. So yeah, there were a lot of books to tempt me. There were a lot that I resisted, but there are some really, really interesting books that now, like talking back through them, I know I need to like write them down and start looking for them, because some of these books that I've just told you about, if I don't read them until October or November, that's fine. But there's now like 5 or 6 of these that I'm like, oh shoot, I forgot about that one. Oh, I forgot about that one too. Oh, this one I really need to read in the next couple of months. So I need to start getting some of these. So I will be adding a lot of these to a notes app on my phone or something, just so that when I go to the bookshop, I can have them to look them up. So stay tuned to future book vlogs and book videos. I will let you know as I start buying some of these and reading some of these. But yeah, I'm gonna wrap this up. So give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, subscribe if you're not subscribed. I'd really appreciate both of those things. Let me know if any of these books appeal to you, if any of our interests overlap a little bit, or if you've read any of these books and can recommend them. I would love to know that. And yeah, is there a book that you ever saw on vacation that you either bought and were really, really glad you did, or that you didn't buy and then regretted it? I think that could be another fun question for this video. So let's just chat books down in the comments, and I will see you soon on Monday in the next vlog, getting back to our regular schedule. So I will see you all then. Thank you very much for watching today. Bye.